All right. Good evening. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight for a community conversation about the event of January 6, 2021. This has been a week none of us will forget anytime soon. The events which took place at the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday have had a profound effect on us all. So where do we go from here? My name is Julie Wagner, and it is my honor to moderate a conversation about the events which took place at the U.S. Capitol and where do we go from here. Also, thank you to Sarah Davis-Dean for your help with coordinating the panelists and running the Zoom meeting. The format for tonight will consist of the moderator, me, asking questions to the panel. Everyone else will remain muted. Tonight, we will be chatting with leadership within the Roanoke community. Tonight is not about partisanship. Tonight is about processing, coming together, and how do we move forward. Joining us on our panel tonight are Michelle Davis, Michael Gallagher, Luke Priddy, and Trish White-Boyd. Before we begin our conversation, let's take a moment for the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us how they are leaders within our community. We'll go ahead and start with Michelle.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you to everybody for putting this together. I think it's an incredible opportunity to have a really thoughtful discussion. How I'm a leader within the community. I am a former council member as of December 31st of this year in Roanoke City, and CEO at Boys and Girls Club. So my real day-to-day work is in community development. Serving on city council was an honor, and I was very, very lucky to have that opportunity. And it is in very capable hands, as Trish will tell you in just a few minutes. So it's always been my desire and my passion to understand how do we help elevate the situations and the circumstances of everyone in this community. And I look forward to having this conversation tonight to talk about that a little bit more, especially when you frame it in the national unrest and turmoil. So thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Michael?
Hi, my name is Michael Gallagher. I am a deputy clerk within the Roanoke County Circuit Court. I also have sat on boards of the Provincial Council of Roanoke County and also Children's Trust. Also, some of you all may know that I started a media campaign and managed a media campaign to help get Deschutes to Roanoke. I was raised in Roanoke. I graduated from Northside High School. And I'm like Michelle in terms of that I am very fond of this community and I want the best for this community. And right now we're seeing a lot of division and a lot of turmoil throughout the country, and definitely is affecting our area just as much. So I am thankful for this conversation, and I'm thankful for being invited and being included in such conversation. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Luke?
Hi. First, thank you, Julie and Sarah, for putting this together. It's it's difficult to find ways to come together, especially during the COVID pandemic. And I think this will be a good way to reflect on what happened on January 6th and look at steps to move forward. For everyone who doesn't know, my name is Luke Priddy. I'm the Chief of Staff to State Senator John Edwards. I'm a member of the local Democratic Committee. I recently ran for office, was not successful, but I'm very active in my community and care a lot about the future of Roanoke and really Virginia as a whole. I look forward to what we're going to talk about tonight and unload about what went on the other day. Hey, Julie.
Nice. Thanks, Luke. Next is Trish.
Hi, and thanks, Julie, and of course, Sarah, for putting this together. And thank you for thinking about me and inviting me, because I certainly have quite a few things to say. I am the director of Blue Ridge Senior Services, and I never considered myself a community activist. I think the media and a lot of other outlets kind of label that on me through years of my outreach and campaigning for so many other people in the community. It's amazing how many people that I've campaigned for. But I will say that I am a community activist, and I really enjoy my role on council because now I can really make some meaningful and substantial changes. So I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight. It's good to see all of you. I haven't seen you guys in a while, so it's good to see everybody.
Thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So by now, we have all seen the disturbing images of the events of January 6th. Many of us watched the event unfold live. As you were watching the events unfold, how did it affect you? We'll go ahead and start with Michelle.
So I was at work on Wednesday at Boys and Girls Club, and it's amazing, Trish, when you're off council, all of a sudden your calendar is wide open. And so I've been in the office more than usual, and I have intentionally been listening to radio a lot in my office. And so I was very up to speed with what was going on, and I came home for a late lunch around 2 o'clock and to let the dog out, and couldn't peel my eyes away from the TV. I was absolutely shocked to see what was going on. And I came back to the office, and it's interesting, you know, working at a nonprofit, I have to be very, very careful because I know the political leanings of the folks that I work with. And even though we work in, community development and youth services, and you would think that the majority of the people I work with are very socially liberal. In fact, I work with some folks who are very, very, very conservative, and I have to be incredibly careful because they're my employees, and you don't want to unintentionally disenfranchise people within your own office. And so I did walk into my director of operations office, who I know is sympathetic to my political leanings, and shut the door and said, I don't know what's going on as a country. I said, this is absolutely unbelievable. So it was shocking, to say the least. I have a group of really, really close girlfriends from around the country. We were all good friends in our 20s in Chicago, and we were all texting about it as well. I labeled it, personally, to me, it felt as if we had a president, the leader of the United States, who was inciting a riot. That's what I saw in the media that I was consuming and what I was watching. I had listened to the entire speech that the president gave, and then came home and saw the Capitol building being breached. And so that was the frame that my mind put around this, was that our president had incited a riot. So I'll leave it there, Julie. I know you've got a lot of questions to get through, and I could talk on that one subject for an hour, so I'll try and be brief.
Michael?
Yes, and like everyone else, and Michelle, I was also at work. When it actually happened, I was in court, just had come out of court and actually was still in court, and received a message through our in-house instant messenger about what was going on in DC. Of course, not really being able to do anything, I had to wait until after I got out of court. But when I did, I went online and started looking up things and watching video. And of course, everybody was live at that point. It's disheartening. It was shocking. It was sad. And most and foremost, it was embarrassing. We basically had the spotlight of the world right there. And we basically showed that, I don't know, it's hard to put into words exactly what the world thinks, and I don't want to speak for the world, but to have center stage in that type of event unfolding before our eyes will be talked about for a long time. And I think that it doesn't matter what political leaning you are, it was something that should have never happened. And it will be something that we are going to have more discussions throughout this year and throughout the next few years to try to build the relationships that have been damaged and the reputation that definitely has been hurt. So it was tough to watch because we're a better country than this, and it was something that we have started seeing kind of build up over the years. And it's sad and disheartening that we have people out there that are taking it upon themselves to not only create chaos, but destroy something that is trying to be built and has been built for many of years. So.
Thank you. Luke?
Thank you, Julie. First, Michelle and Michael, thank you for sharing how it affected you both that day. Julie, I think you phrased the question like, as you were watching the events, how did it affect you? And to be honest, I wasn't watching them. When I first heard about it, I got like a flurry of text messages while I was driving and called my mom to ask her what she was watching. And then I called my coworker to ask what he was watching. And he told me, you know, if the first thing I'd say is to stay away from the Capitol, both Richmond and DC. But for me personally, I really didn't start to process it, start to watch it, or really even allow myself to think about it until much later that day. When I first got the messages, when I first started listening to the radio, even just a little bit, I was in shock. It's something that wasn't surprising, but definitely startling. And I don't think I was yet ready to process what was going on. I drove back to work and I got a couple of more things done. I made some phone calls, and each person that I talked to, it was clear that they were glued to it. But you know, it was scary. It was something that I did not yet want to face and confront. Being at the Capitol sometime last year, when surrounded multiple times for different lobby days, ones where people couldn't even come anymore to visit. There were thoughts of like that this could have been Richmond, and honestly it was before, it just never got that far. And even as I'm preparing for next year being most likely leaving tomorrow morning to head to Richmond, making sure that something like this doesn't happen again. Because as much as January 6th was something that happened just a few days ago, I really don't think we're through it yet. We're in a period of transition. And I'd like to say I hope that the worst is yet to come, but I'm hoping that that wasn't a test run for something else.
Thank you, Luke. Trish?
Thank you, Julie. Yes, I was shocked, of course, and in disbelief. This is the first time ever, ostensibly, I've ever seen a breach like that. But I was shocked for a different reason. I was shocked because I'm like, where the heck is the police? You know, I've seen numerous marches. You know, my friends went up for the Women's March, and I wanted Sarah to put up this picture of all of these military or police standing up on the stairs. This is how it looked at one of the Black Lives Matters march, and that is what came to my mind. And I called my brother, who is a retired military, who was with the 82nd Airborne, and I said, where is Special Forces? Where, you know, that was what I was thinking. Why were they able to get this far? Because we all know that there's no way that being, you know, the LGBT marches or the Women's March or the BLM marches, there's no way in hell we would have gotten that far. Look at this. This is what that's how they prepared for Black people and for anybody other than this fascist group that has pretty much hijacked this country. And so I was very shocked that they got that far. It wasn't shocked that they were doing it, because I've seen the element. I actually had my TV on. I was prepared to watch, you know, the electoral college count. I just watch it. I made a mistake about a TV putting it in my office last year. So I was watching it. And so I was seeing it unfold and calling and texting people like, can you believe this? Can you believe they are in there? That's what we were saying. That's what was shocking to me, is that they got that far.
So Trish, I'll go ahead. I'm going to change a little bit from the format that we discussed earlier. I'm going to go ahead and start with you with this next question. What and it's actually, you already answered part of it, is your reaction to the differences between the events of Wednesday compared to the Black Lives Matter movement that we all saw this summer.
Yes, for some reason, I was not shocked to see that that they had gotten, into the Capitol. I was shocked to see the response and how long it took them to control it, because they were not prepared. They just, I just don't think that people thought that this group would be that dangerous. And, I don't know, 93% of the BLM marches were peaceful. You got 7% that, acted a riot and carried on, but 93% were peaceful. But they never let any of us get that close to that Capitol. And yet they knew what to expect when you have a group like that. When you have 6 million is not enough. When you're wearing T-shirts like that and flying the swastika and the the rebel flag. I was about to call it the Dixie flag. You should know what kind of people you're dealing with, and it just surprised me, and it really frustrated me, and it really angered me. The treatment that we get as Black people, brown people, colored people, or even the LGBT community, the treatment that we get compared to what happened. I mean, they were literally inside sitting in Nancy Pelosi's office. And you saw that picture I just showed you. This is how they prepare for us. So that was the frustrating part for me, because this is not patriotism. This is racism at its highest form.
Luke, what are your thoughts?
Well, how is Black Lives Matter different than the people on January 6th? I mean, I think it's hard to even find ways to really compare them. But the Black Lives Matter protests happened for hundreds of days in hundreds of places, and we never saw anything like this. Black Lives Matter was a sustained grassroots movement that took great pains to prevent violent escalations and avoid property damage while they couldn't at all times. On the other hand, on January 6th, we saw an escalating trend from last year's rally against the assault weapons ban, through extremist organizations attacking BLM protests in Portland and the ugly scenes at the Michigan State House, even the plot to kidnap not only our own governor, but other governors in the United States. Even on January 6th, when they're continuing to try to push limits of what they could get away with. Most fundamentally, Black Lives Matter is centered on a righteous concept and seeks to work within the system to change our nation for the better. January 6th was centered on delusion and mass hysteria and seeks to burn down our institution from the inside.
Michael, what are your thoughts?
Well, first I want to say, what we saw, I don't like comparing Black Lives Movement to what we saw on January 6th. And the reason I say that is because, well, there's two different things that we have to look at. The Black Lives Matter movement and what we saw with the riots and the looting and this and that are two separate things. Black Lives Matter movement was a protest. And as Trish White-Boyd said, 93% were peaceful. Well, technically, if you really look at the movement itself, the protests were all peaceful. It was the groups of people that took advantage of a situation and created the destruction, the burning of buildings, the looting, the rioting, things like that. So I think you do have to separate it. And to the same extent, on January 6th, you have a group of extremists that took what the president said and took his words and took action. You had a lot of Republicans there that were peaceful. But at the same time, you had a group of people that were extremists, such as QAnon and Proud Boys and Lord knows who else, get together and take action into their own hands. With security and things, I was also shocked in terms of that there had not been more security there on January 6th because of the fact that DC police and military, which I know has to be put in by the president or vice president or, whoever, but DC police should have been more prepared for that. And I do echo the sentiments that we heard late on early morning, January 7th, and the fact of why weren't they there? And why did it take what it did to get enough security there to get the matter under control? I am glad to see that there is going to be law and order and that there have been arrests and that there are warrants out for the people that did raid Capitol Hill and in the Capitol. And I'm glad that they are taking the necessary actions to bring justice to the wrongdoings of a certain number of people. But I definitely do not think that I don't like the whole putting Black Lives Matters movement, because I think the violence that we saw during the protests over those, the summer and into the fall, that was by a group of individuals that were just taking advantage of opportunity. This was extremist groups that were there for the rally, that took advantage and took what the president said, which should have never been said, and some of the other statements that were said definitely did not help matters. And I think that those people should be brought to justice. And I think that the differences between the two, from what I've watched, is we've saw acts of violence amongst a group of people. I don't want to bring anything negative to the Black Lives Matters movement, because like I said, that was protests that were peaceful, and you had groups of people that took advantage of those protests to create chaos and violence and destruction. And then with this group, it was kind of the same thing. So you're seeing extremists and, I guess, people that take the opportunists that take advantage of certain situations to create chaos, violence, and do harm to communities and also to the nation.
Okay. Michelle, your thoughts?
Yeah, so this is a little bit different stance and a little bit different than what Michael was just commenting on. The thing that really struck me, and I agree completely with Trish, I mean, the lack of police presence was striking. I don't know how that happened. I look forward to hopefully uncovering. I hope that there's enough investigation done into figuring out why in the world there weren't more people there. We all knew there had a high likelihood to become inflammatory and to create this opportunity. How did the Capitol Police not know that? It makes no sense. So I look forward to letting the facts play out so that we know what really happened in that moment. The thing that struck me, the biggest difference, I think that, and this is where I disagree with Michael a little bit, I think that you've got people on both sides, Black Lives Matter, and then the people in the January 6th protest who, I wouldn't even call them necessarily opportunistic. Yes, you've got those folks, but people who get really excited. I read a story, an analogy that somebody used where if you put black ants and you put red ants in a jar, and it's like scientific study, and you shake them up, the black ants and the red ants will fight each other. Whereas if you just put black ants and red ants in a jar together, they don't actually attack each other. They don't think that the person that's inciting that the violence between the two groups is the person holding the jar. It's not the ants themselves. So I thought that was a really fascinating way to think through this. What strikes me the most, and everybody that's comparing Black Lives Matters and is comparing January 6th, is that Black Lives Matter movement was about individual rights. Everybody is protesting for the right to, as an individual in this society and as a human being, to have certain inalienable rights that we have all been promised. And it's a collective voice trying to give, it's trying to amplify those who don't typically get heard. What happened on January 6th was not about individual rights. It was about a big group of people who were protesting the rights of one human being, which is the President of the United States, and what they perceived as his right to contest the election. And that was just, to me, the part that I get so frustrated. And one of the things I really wanted to talk about tonight is I listen to a lot. I intentionally turn on media that offers viewpoints that are contrary to my own viewpoints, because I know that I'm influenced by what I hear. People talk about an echo chamber. I'm in an echo chamber too. I turn to those viewpoints in media that validate what I feel. And so it's very easy for me to judge and to look at another side and say, how in the world, you're dumb. You think that way, you've got to be an idiot. If you take time to listen to what other people are hearing, so I mean, we can use left and right, extreme conservatism versus extreme liberalism. Extreme conservatives genuinely believe they are right because that is also what they're being fed. And what really angered me the most about this is that nobody is talking about, when you compare, I mean, in the conservative media, you know, my favorite is that everybody is blaming Antifa. Like, does anybody on here even know anybody who would identify as being a part of Antifa? Like, I didn't even know what it was. I had to look it up. The fact that Antifa is being blamed for everything that the left does that is causing problems in the right. And then on the right, honestly, or on the left, we're blaming the right for all of the extremists and for everybody who's racist and for everybody who's neo-Nazi. So we've created these labels and we've created this judgment, one side to the other. And if we really are trying to figure out the root cause of the problem, you have to go down as far as what I started this with, which was Black Lives Matter. You got a bunch of people that are really trying to struggle for the rights of a lot of human beings, a lot of individuals. And what happened on January 6th, a whole lot of human beings were motivated and were willing to risk their lives, risk their professional careers, risk their everything for the rights of one person who they believe to be more right than anybody else on the face of the planet. And I think if we're going to really have a conversation about healing, we have to understand, how did those people get to that point? And how do we get back to this conversation about what's best for all of humanity, not just for our personal beliefs based on what we've all been consuming for the past 4, 10, 20 years. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Michelle. So the next question is, do you feel as though the events were a turning point in our nation's history? And we'll go ahead and start with Luke this time.
Ooh, I hope that they are. Certainly they're historic and part of an escalating trend. We'll only be able to know what it looks like 10 years from now when we're there, but we're living in it right now. If the question is whether the rising tide of extremism has reached a point where it will now go down on its own, I think the answer is no. It needs to be a turning point for all of us. For the vast majority of Americans who didn't like what they saw on January 6th, where we begin to realize that we all have to take this problem more seriously, we can't just have it go away. We need to confront it. We need to do something about it. We can have these conversations about healing. I'm just not sure that we're yet healing from a moment that's passed or something that we're still transitioning through and something that we're still facing currently every day. These are many of the people who were there, and not the rioters, but even some of them are people from our community. There are neighbors. Some of them might even be friends. I'm fairly certain that everyone had some distant family member who was either there or would have considered going. And we could say that they weren't people involved in the riot, and that may even be a separate piece of what the entire event was that day. But I sure hope we're at a turning point in history, but it's going to take more time.
Thank you. Michael.
I mean, I think Luke said it best. This is something we're going through now. We're not going to know really if this is a turning point for another probably 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years from now. You know, the issue is and what kind of turning point is it? Is it a turning point of to where we're going towards more extremism, or is it a turning point to where we see people start taking action and coming together and working together as much as possible, putting whatever political beliefs or differences aside and saying that we're Americans? That's going to be the question that we all are going to have to answer. And I think that's leading into as a community, how do we heal? And I won't go too far into that since that's another question on here. But it is something that we have to look like. I was speaking to a buddy before January 6th event even happened, talking about just, you know, the pandemic that small businesses are facing and how everything, you know, small business has been hit hard, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, people can sit and talk and complain and go on Facebook and other social media platforms. And I mean, that's all it is. And, you know, it's going to take more of coming together and talking, but then also taking action. And I think that's what we have to look at from a community standpoint. And that's what we have to look at for this question in terms of, is this a turning point? Is it a turning point to where we not just only talk, but we actually come together and we take action and we start looking at what we can do as a community to benefit one another and not just complain about something and not just, you know, complain about whatever politician is in, or if we go to our politicians, we hold them accountable. We go to our leaders, whether they're county leaders, city leaders, whatever, or if we hear rhetoric that is creating more division and creating more hostility, do we speak out and do we, you know, hold them accountable for their own language and their own actions? Because, you know, these extremist groups that we're seeing and that we saw on January 6th, you know, like it was said, they were incited by a person. And we have to hold those people accountable. And, you know, looking at social media, looking at Twitter, which, you know, I stay on, anybody that knows me knows that I pretty much live on social media. And you hear rhetoric that is only creating more hostility and more arguments. And that's something that this country does not need right now. And that's something that we as constituents need to hold our politicians and our leaders accountable for, because we put them in office to lead us. We put them in office to look up to somebody to help bring our country and our communities into the future. And we have to look at that and we have to hold them accountable just as much as we have to hold one another accountable. Because there are plenty of people out in the streets and the communities that are our friends, our families, and they're saying the same thing. They're saying things that are creating more of a argument instead of a conversation. And we have to take action and kind of set the record straight and create that conversation and we may agree to disagree at the end of it all, but at the same time, we're still understanding where the other person, their opinions are being formed and why they believe the way they do. And even if we do disagree, there's a better understanding and hopefully a newfound respect in terms of why they believe the way they do. And that's something we need to do. We need to take action and do more of, instead of just complaining that we don't agree with something or because we don't understand it. We need to take the action of educating ourselves. And we need to hold people accountable for what they say and their actions that they do.
Thank you. Michelle.
Michael, you use the term rhetoric, and I think that that's such an important key word in this conversation. I think the growth of rhetoric because of social media, I mean, it's been exponential, and it's really easy for us to start and I'll say as a formal local city leader, somebody who speaks publicly or used to speak publicly very regularly, the rhetoric becomes a part of our everyday vocabulary. And it's really easy to use words that signify judgment, that signify, judgment's probably the best word, where we're telling people just, you may not be saying a statement that is overly politicized, but in the word choice that you're making, because it just becomes a part of our daily vocabulary, you are disenfranchising potentially 50% of your audience. And I think that when you ask if this was a turning point, I actually think the biggest turning point, potential turning point in all of this was the president getting kicked off of social media. For me, when I saw that announcement, and I guess Twitter made the announcement that the president was going to get banned yesterday permanently. And it's so interesting to watch the conversations that are now taking place about First Amendment right, and about, and the same breath, people like to talk about capitalism. Well, Twitter is a privately owned company, and Twitter does have the right to shut down folks that they think are inciting violence because it is a privately owned company. First Amendment rights are guaranteed by the government, of the right of people to speak and to be heard to government, but not to speak and be heard to everybody, and not everybody has to listen. And social media, I truly believe, has created a lot of the extremism that we see today because, to use the word again, the echo chamber that it creates, where this rhetoric is constantly being circulated and it becomes a part of our everyday vocabulary and the way that we talk about people, the way we describe people, the way that we describe people's feelings. And you think about it, if you've got someone that you want to either potentially change their mind, or even just somebody that you want to understand their viewpoint, when you use these words that are based in rhetoric from the very first time you address them, they will immediately shut down and become defensive. And there is no opening. There is no opening to further conversation or to healing or to, any kind of future opportunity for, even if it's an understanding that we agree to disagree. That doesn't happen anymore because everybody comes at this from such a judgmental viewpoint. And I don't think people mean to be judgmental. It has become a part of our everyday vocabulary. So I do think it's a turning point because we're starting to see some of the large corporations that have housed and been responsible for some really great advances in technology. I'm not going to blame social media for everything. We've seen great advances in technology that have done a lot of folks good, including Roanoke and Michael, Gallagher, and Deschutes, right? Like, we know that there are really good things about social media and the opportunity to create community across physical, geographical borders. But at some point in time, we have to start to take personal responsibility, and social media companies have to take responsibility for the divisiveness that is created by the limitations of those platforms, and start to address that as well. It's no longer enough just to stand back and say, I'm providing the platform, good luck to you all. I think we're starting to realize now that the platform itself is causing some of our issues. And if this is what it took for us to start to recognize that, then I do think that that's a turning point.
Thank you. Trish?
Well, a turning point, I heard Michelle mention, when they took shut down the president's account. Well, they could have shut it down when he called young Black men who kneeled in protest of Black Lives Matter sons of bitches. They could have shut it down then, but they didn't. So, I don't know. I mean, there's just they had so many opportunities. I think for me, and Luke, I will have to say that none of my relatives were there. So I will have to say, I have to disagree on you on that one. None of my distant relatives would have shown up to that mess. But anyway, I would say for me, the turning point was May 25, 2020, when we saw George Floyd die in front of we saw it. We literally saw him die. And, the nation really felt that pain, and there was a huge uprising, not just here in the United States, but all across the country. I mean, my heart was overflowing when I saw, the bridge in London packed with people protesting. That to me was the turning point. But it also made this other fascist group more anxious, more angry. It seems like it just pushed them even further to the right, saying that, all lives matter, blue lives matter, all of this nonsense, which is not what that is based on. So, we've got a lot to talk about here. Nobody has mentioned the fact that the reason I was comparing the two, Michael, is because of the difference in the treatment and how, even the president said, if they were Black, storming into the, can you imagine, 300-400 Black folks running around in the Capitol? You cannot even imagine that. If you tell me you can imagine that, then that literally would just blow my mind. That is something we have to talk about. White privilege. It is still not fair, and we can't talk about a turning point. We can't start to heal until we address that there is certainly white privilege. Even Vice President, President-elect Biden acknowledged it, not just Biden, but Kamala Harris. I mean, anybody who watched that knows that. Even my friends, white friends that live here text me and say, what do you think would have happened if they had been Black? So we have got to acknowledge the fact that there are a lot of racial issues still in this country, that, we're looking at racism. Like I said earlier, they say, oh, this is patriotism. That is not patriotism. That is racism. And we really need to start looking at that. So yes, they shut, his Twitter account down. They're starting to make some arrests, but none of that should have even happened. And if it were me, just like, okay, say for example, Michelle, remember when we had the group come in about the Second Amendment, sanctuary city? Remember that? Okay, do you think that, and you remember some of them had guns, flags and everything. If it had been 150 Black folk in there with guns, I think somebody would have been calling Roanoke County Police Department, Roanoke City, they would have summoned every police department in this area there, but nobody did that. We had one guy standing in the back, and Sherman Stovall, who is carrying an ink pen and not I mean, seriously, this is the kind of thing that frustrates Black people, and it frustrates me because we don't talk about that part of it. We want, we got to hold our leaders accountable. We got to hold each other accountable, like you said, Michael, but we also have to start calling out white privilege, racism. We have to start addressing all of that so that we can get to the point when we can heal. But we are not there yet. We are nowhere near that point. And so I don't see a turning point. The only turning point that I saw was when people finally realized that, yeah, Black people do get treated differently. A man could be murdered in broad daylight. Just like the one, Shara, if you could show this picture, Sarah, of a guy, Sterling Alton in Louisiana, in New Orleans. This guy, as graphic as it is, was executed in broad daylight. He was shot and killed right there, being arrested, and people saw it. This is the kind of thing that has been going on for decades. I mean, it is unbelievable. I mean, look how close that is. That is an execution. This is the kind of stuff that makes me sick. And it has been going on for decades. Now we have people with their cell phones and Facebook Live videoing or whatever. Just imagine, in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s when they weren't able to record this kind of activity. This is the kind of stuff that we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to figure out how we can deal with this and deal with the racism in this country, because that group that is following Trump, that are pro-Trump, not all of them are racist, but you can't deny the fact that the majority of them have to be racist. When you follow a president that calls our poor third world countries shithole countries, or our Black men who protest being beaten and shot execution style sons of bitches. Those people, I mean, I have had, my friends I grew up with in Florida. I grew up in a small town, so I went to high school. I started in elementary school with the same group of people and graduated with the same group of people. We are falling out every day. I have unfriended. I mean, I cannot understand how someone could say what he is done or what he is doing is good, and how they can support this president when he treats the other people the way he treats them. And I don't want to rant and rave, so I'll leave it at that. But as you can tell, there's still a lot of frustration, and I'm still a little bit upset by the actions that took place on January 6th, simply because it was awful what they did to our state capitol. I mean, to our United States Capitol, and it was awful how it was handled. So I'll leave it at that and let somebody else talk. But yeah.
Thank you, Trish. So for our next question, how can you as a leader within the community offer community support? And we'll go ahead and start with you, Michael.
Well, I think I kind of spoke upon that on the last question. I think that leaders, whether they're elected, whether they're business leaders, whether they're community leaders, I think we have to get out there. We have to sit there and get rid of the labels and just have the honest conversations that we're having tonight, and take action and make sure that everybody's held accountable for their actions and their own words that they speak. I think if the community leaders and business leaders and organizational leaders and elected leaders, I think if they all, came together and they basically wanted to show, hey, we're Americans, then we have to be together. We have to show that we are Americans. We have to show we're in this together, and we have to move forward, and we have to move forward in a positive manner. I think that's where we start. Now, where it goes from there, that's yet to be determined, but I think that we have to have that starting point. And I think a conversation like what we're having tonight is one of those conversations that's a start. I think that, if you look and kind of going through all this, what we saw on January 6th, that was assault on legislation foundation of Democratic Republic and our Constitution. It was domestic terrorism. I mean, I've heard people say, that was an act of war, and it was domestic terrorism. It was something that should never have happened. It should have been something that our country and that area should have been prepared for. And, it's something that I think a lot of people recognize, if not everybody recognizes, no matter who you are, what party you belong to, what party you lean to, whatever, taking politics out of it. But I think everybody recognizes that. And I think everybody recognizes what we saw on January 6th was something that nobody ever wanted to see. And it's now we have to continue to move forward and figure out how to do that. And I think, as I said, us as community leaders need to be that lead by example. And if we can't lead by example, then we probably should let somebody else lead them, because we need to be the people that bring people together to have conversations, to educate, to be able to know that we're not labeled as a racist or as someone that, is destructive or someone that is trying to take away rights and this and that. It needs to be more of an education of the fact of that we're in this together, and we have to go forward in our communities together. And the only way that our communities can be successful, and the only way that our nation can be successful, is if we come together.
Thank you. Michelle?
Hey, it works. Sorry. And now my dog's going to start barking again. Sorry about that. So I have been, over the course of the past probably 6 months, been doing a lot of reflecting of how did we get to this point? How did we have as a nation somebody as anti-establishment, and I say that knowing full well that he was very much of the business world, of the establishment, but anti-political establishment, such as Donald Trump, somebody who so clearly disrespected women, minorities, like all of these things that any other politician prior to his time would have absolutely been disqualified for. The party would have kicked them out immediately if any of this stuff had surfaced on any other candidate running for president. And yet somehow he made it to the top and then actually got himself elected. And I imagine the day after President Trump won the election, he looked in the mirror and was like, oh shit, what did I do? And now what do I do? My question has been, how did that even happen? How did we get to the place as a country where 4 years ago that happened? And one of the things that I've really been trying to focus on, because it's so important in Southwest Virginia, this is critical to where we live. Roanoke City is a little Democratic enclave that is surrounded by highly Republican counties and rural areas. And what we see going on across the country is you've got this battle for tradition, which typically is more valued in more rural communities, versus what I'm going to call academic elitism. And that's actually a pejorative that the right really uses a lot to talk about what the left feels. But you've got this clash that has reached an all-time high. And while you can get really mad that we've gotten to this point, what I think effective leaders do in this moment is try and dissect what got us here. And what really got us here was that you had a lot of people, mostly a lot of people living in rural America, a lot of people who've been struggling for a really long time, people who don't look like you, Trish, people who look much more like me, and therefore I'm the one that needs to be having this conversation, who have felt that they are, that they've been looked down upon, that their tradition doesn't matter, that their religious beliefs don't matter, because we have all this scientific evidence that now shows that all of the religion that you've believed in for so long and so many generations is no longer factual. Or, you think about what the country was built on, and we have this set of values, but the set of values was also built with an intellectual disadvantage when it comes to scientific evolution or scientific data that we've discovered in the past even 20, 30 years, right? Like, we've come a really long way. And so if we're really going to heal, it's incumbent upon us to start having conversations that, again, and I go back to what I said throughout this whole time, that are not judgmental, that don't use pejoratives, that aren't using the rhetoric and aren't framing the conversations as intellectual versus, whatever your backwards way of thinking is, because you've got people that are really trying to cling on to the last thing that they believe to be true, whatever that is. And they're desperate. And what we saw on January 6th was desperation. Now, what we saw in the Black Lives Matter movement was also desperation, right? It's desperation to be heard, to be recognized, to be seen, to be valued. And so that's the one thing that if we're trying to create some kind of common community conversation, we have a lot of people who feel like they are not valued, like they are not heard, and like they're not respected on both sides. Now, do I value, hear, or understand the racism that exists? No. But I do see in where we are in Southwest Virginia, the history from which it has evolved. And I don't want to fault someone for having lived in, again, the echo chamber for generations that have perpetrated those beliefs. So it's a really big problem. It's a problem that can't be solved overnight, but it is a problem that's going to take us stepping outside of our own comfort zones, stepping outside of what we believe wholeheartedly to be true, because the moment you walk into a conversation knowing that you are right and knowing that you have nothing to learn from the other person, I mean, the conversation is shut down in that moment. I think that that's, for me, what I can do to offer the community support in this moment is to be willing to drop all judgment. But again, I can do that because as a white female, I haven't had to live and walk the shoes of Trish and having to unfriend the folks that she grew up with who, you know, you can't believe that people would believe this when they were your friend. You know, I understand that. I think I come from a place of privilege in this, and that I can try and somehow bridge the communication gap. Now, I can't do it alone. It's going to take hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people trying to step up to bridge that communication gap in order to help everyone feel as if they're heard. Because unless anybody's ever been to marriage counseling, right? Like if you don't feel heard, if you don't feel like somebody else has listened to you, then there is no ability to continue to expound on what you're feeling or to continue to put out into the world the things that you've always held to be true, and then to start to consider whether or not those things are actually true. So I think that's the best thing that I can do. And as a white female, again, recognizing the geographical territory that we're situated in here in Southwest Virginia, I think it's incumbent upon me and other people like me to do that. Now, what I learned from being on city council is that from a political perspective, it looks wishy-washy. Like if I were saying this, I can say this now being off of council, and I probably could not have said it when I was on council, because it would have looked as if I didn't have an opinion, or would have looked wishy-washy, or I would have gotten accused of all of these things of I'm trying to hear both sides. But in reality, I believe that both sides have, of any argument, not just this one, of any argument, have deep-seated beliefs in which if you attack those beliefs from the get-go, there's never going to be an open door for any kind of future learning. And so now is the opportunity for us to try and create that future learning opportunity. And I do think that it is happening. I do think that people are starting to open up to starting to understand. I mean, I've been watching some Fox News, and if you can, for me personally, stomach it and not throw things at the TV. I was shocked, honestly, at some of the news anchors on Fox News on Wednesday who were actually condemning the president for the first time in 4 years. Why the hell it took them 4 years, I don't know. But for the first time in 4 years, you had people that were really starting to see that this president is divisive, that this president was using coded language that was inciting violence and inciting insurrection.
Thank you, Michelle. Trish?
Well, you know, I don't know if you've ever heard a Black person say, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. So we're just sick and tired of being sick and tired. You know, we've had these conversations, we've talked, we've had forums, we've marched, we've done everything. So for me, you know, I am a little bit exhausted because you're talking to a person. My son was in the military. He came home a couple of years ago, and he had some stuff in storage, and I may have told this story to you before, or you may have heard it because I was talking to another group of women, and he had his things in storage in Benton. And it was about 8 o'clock one night, and he had moved in with me until he got his apartment, and he was going to go down to his storage in Benton at 8 o'clock at night. And I said, are you kidding me? I said, no, you cannot. He was like, Mom. I was like, no, you're not going to do it. I did not let him do that because I'm thinking at 8 o'clock at night, you're down in Benton, you're in a storage unit. Somebody says, you know, what are you doing in there? And he's just getting out of the military. I'm like, what the hell? You know, this is my story. You know, one thing leading to another. How many of you have had to do that or even thought that? See, this is the kind of thing that Black people go through. So what I did last year, it was about 25 elderly white women. I would say they were older because they were probably in their 60s or 70s. I started having them over, and we would bring food, and I would show them movies because I wanted them to understand. We were just talking about, I don't know, it just came up in a conversation. You know, I was saying, you know, about Tulsa. Well, this was before the president thought he went to Tulsa and discovered it. Like, you did not discover Tulsa. So we were talking about, because this was in February, so it was about 20, 25 of them. And they said, I'm embarrassed. And they said, I'm so glad that, because I didn't have any of my Black friends over, because I didn't want my Black friends pointing fingers saying, you didn't know about the Tulsa massacre. You didn't know about the Orangeburg massacre. So I had them come over, and that was what I could do, because I wanted them to understand. I mean, because we can't make excuses for a lot of different behaviors, but I do want them to understand why some Black people are so frustrated, and why we're not angry. Some people call us angry. We're not angry, we're frustrated. And so I wanted them to understand that frustration. So I brought them over, and we would, eat, drink wine, and watch these movies. They watched the Tulsa Massacre. A couple of them cried. They'd never seen it before. 60 years old, educated women. I'm not going to even call any names. Educated women. One, a doctor, had never even heard of it. And this was last February at my house. I showed that. And then, every month, third Wednesday, we would watch some more. I tried to make them really short. We looked at redlining, because they were like, if I did it, why couldn't Black people do it? People don't understand that we didn't have the opportunity. They drew a line, and they say, hey, you don't sell to Black people out of this area. You don't loan them money. So we had no generational wealth. Like Michelle said, she came from white privilege. How many of you had your parents leave you, $200,000 or $300,000? Well, Black people, they didn't have that, because they were not able to accumulate that kind of wealth. So I took it upon myself to have these little seminars here, these little workshops, and they thanked me. And COVID came along, and then we had to stop them. But they're texting me like, I'll be glad when we can get back, because they were learning and they were understanding. So it felt good to me, because it appeared they really, really wanted to understand. And they were like, I cannot believe some of the stuff they never heard of. And you wonder, why did you not know about this? So things like that, I think, will help. I want to continue to do that with that group of ladies, because they are very prominent in the white community. And I think they will go back and they will take these messages. In fact, I will mention one. Suzanne Thornley wrote an article to the Roanoke Times, Wake Up White People. And she wrote it after I had that conversation with her, and after a couple of these movies. So go back and look that up. It was in the Roanoke Times. It's probably around March. And she said, Wake Up White People. Do any of you know Suzanne? No. Okay. Well, it was great. It was really great. And she just said, wake up. It was after George Floyd, because it was so painful for a lot of us. But anyway, things like that, I think, will help the community heal. And I look forward to resuming that.
Thank you, Trish. Luke?
Thank you, Julie. What I hear everyone talking about really leads back to teaching, education, and understanding. We need to be willing to lead by example. As Michael said earlier, we need to be able to show that we are bigger people, and that we can learn and change our views. And Michelle was talking about how that can be seen as a bad thing, but honestly, it demonstrates education. It demonstrates being able to learn more, and it demonstrates growth. What our community needs is for leaders who are bold, who are going to stand up and against what's wrong, but also be willing to come to the table and see that we shouldn't be as divisive as we are. Something during the COVID pandemic that I've seen is that people are just becoming more divisive. Earlier, Michelle and Michael talked about rhetoric and how if you use certain terms, then like cancel culture or zero tolerance, and people won't want to listen to you. And on Facebook, people are becoming so much more neatly divided into their own camps, and they're not willing to listen to each other. Something that we lost with COVID-19 was just our humanity and ability to connect, to get with people on common ground for a hobby or something else that's just part of our daily lives, and look past the politics. And through that, we would develop an understanding of who they are and who we are. And we knew that we wouldn't agree on everything, but when there would come time for discussion, you could learn and there'd be some understanding because you saw yourself in them and they could see themselves in you. Right now, it just seems as though everyone is so far split apart that we're absolutely alien and foreign to each other. And it's hard to see growth in anybody when we're stuck that way. So leaders need to lead by example and really come to the table there and see what values do we share and what progress can we make. We need leaders on the right and the left who are willing to just acknowledge reality as it is. We need people that are willing to do that difficult work even when it's inconvenient. Something, I'm not sure if you all know, I think it was after World War II. General Eisenhower was going to run for president, and each party wanted him to be to run under their banner. Ultimately, the other main Republican candidate was someone who was much further to the right, who believed that Germany should have control of all of Europe, someone who would be considered more fascist. And instead of Eisenhower running as a Democrat on the left and attempting to beat them in the election, he ran as a Republican to make sure that that person would not become the Republican Party's nominee, and would rather give up a chance of losing to a Democrat just to make sure that a bad person didn't have a chance to succeed and go forward. And that takes sacrifice. That takes some real understanding in education. But personally, what can I do? We talk, we're having these conversations, but if people were to come to me or if I were to come to them, I would tell them that we need to see the humanity in each other. What I can personally do in my job and otherwise is try and serve as a resource. I know it's impossible for me to do anything and everything for somebody else, but I can give them the tools to figure something out and hopefully do something and move forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Luke. Thank you for everybody tonight. So we're out of time. Just have a couple of thoughts before we close. Almost 70 years ago, my paternal grandparents, along with my aunts and my father, immigrated to the U.S. from Germany. A little over 50 years ago, my mother immigrated to the U.S. from Germany. We, the people, welcomed them with open arms. Throughout our nation's history, we, the people, have shown our resilience, strength, and love. Through the uncertainty of world wars, depression, recession, and the days which followed 9/11, we saw Republicans and Democrats putting differences aside and coming together. Although the present time brings a lot of uncertainty and anxiety, I am hopeful the vision my grandparents and parents had of the United States all those years ago is still alive and well. I appreciate each of you participating tonight. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for running the Zoom room. This was not an easy conversation, but a very necessary conversation. Thank you for sharing how this looks and feels from your point of view. Thank you for opening up, speaking honestly, and being vulnerable. I wish you all a good night.
Great job, Julie.
Thank you.
So much.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Julie.
Thank
Thanks, Sarah.
Sarah.
Good night, everybody.
I want to say one thing before we leave. If anybody knows me, Theodore Roosevelt is my favorite president, and I just want to leave you all with this. Theodore Roosevelt said, "The rock of democracy will founder when people in different parties, regions, and religions and races think of each other as the other, rather than the common American citizen." And to that, I leave you all with a good night, and I hope you all have a great week.
Thanks,
Thank
Michael.
you.
Thanks, Michael.
God bless.
Thanks, everyone.